everyone, and welcome to Headlines. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. Today we have an intriguing and, quite frankly, somewhat controversial topic to dive into. Russian and U.S. officials spent 4 hours in Saudi Arabia for what both delegations have described as positive talks. In fact, they called it a first step toward easing tensions. But here is a twist. Ukraine and many European leaders are upset over their exclusion from these high-stakes discussions. It's a fascinating story and one that could reshape the dynamics of the ongoing geopolitical landscape. While the EU has long been seen as an influential diplomatic actor, recent developments suggest that its power to mediate global crises is weakening. So, more on this issue today in my program. Joining me to discuss these developments are 3 esteemed guests. First, Yusuf Erim, TRT World's editor-at-large. Straight from the United States, we have Andrei Korobkov, professor of political science, Middle Tennessee State University, and Dr. Melih Demirtas, researcher in Cappadocia University, former diplomat who also served as vice consul in Ukraine. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So let's get right into it. Mr. Erim, the recent meeting between US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. Both sides have agreed to normalize relations and discuss the war in Ukraine, with the US State Department confirming that talks on Ukraine will be part of future discussions. Given this, do you think we are seeing a shift away from the EU's role as a key mediator, especially with the US and Russia taking charge of these conversations?
Well, if we're seeing a shift away from the European Union, it's at its own doing. I mean, ever since the election results became obvious in November in the United States, the EU had at least 3 months to prepare for this moment. I mean, Donald Trump campaigned on bringing peace in Ukraine, and part of bringing peace in Ukraine obviously was going to require diplomacy with the Russians and direct diplomacy with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But over the past 3 months, 4 months, the Europeans have not done anything to course correct their one-dimensional approach to Ukraine, because up until now, it's been support Ukraine, support the war effort with military aid, but there really haven't been any diplomatic initiatives. I mean, if you pull apart Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and also maybe Fico as well, besides those 2 leaders, there's really no leader in the European Union that has tried to establish any type of diplomatic channel with the Russians, apart from 1 or 2 phone calls by Scholz in Germany and also Macron in France. So Europe had many opportunities to be able to open a new dimension, a diplomatic dimension with the Russians to prepare for this moment. But rather than prepare, they decided to continue on their path and probably hoped that Trump would not be able to sit down and open this diplomatic channel, which he did very easily. And now that this diplomatic channel is open, Trump really doesn't see a viable European leader that's worth bringing to the table with him, because who is he going to bring? The German chancellor? He's fighting for his own political life with elections. Macron has unprecedentedly low ratings. The Brits are now, with Brexit, outside of the European Union. So there's really no one influential and unifying enough in Europe, maybe except for Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, that's worth bringing to the table. And the Europeans have left themselves, unfortunately, irrelevant at the moment.
That's a great point, Professor Korobkov. This shift could be seen as a response to Europe's internal fragmentation and its inability to act decisively. We have seen the EU impose sanctions on Russia over the war in Ukraine, but when it comes to direct mediation, Europe is losing its edge. Do you think the US-Russian talks in Saudi Arabia mark a permanent shift in the global power dynamics? Is Europe now more of a bystander in these high-level negotiations?
Yeah, absolutely. Europe lost any leverage. Ukraine also doesn't have really an ability to pressure the US in any way, vice versa. It is totally dependent on, the policy of the US, and it is not clearly defined yet. But it is also known that Trump perceives foreign policy as a policy of great powers. For him, multilateral games are, well, just a waste of time. And for him, also important are two other issues. First, he considers China as a main opponent of the United States. He thinks that the US should start looking towards the Pacific, turn away from the Atlantic. That is becoming a secondary basin for American foreign policy. Besides that, Europeans, major European leaders, whom my colleague just mentioned, they are viewed as ideological opponents, and Trump will continue to undermine them to a larger or lesser degree, depending on the country. And besides all that, Trump thinks that the globalization structure that was built in the last 35 years became harmful to the US, and it also has to be undermined. And respectively, he, in principle, is very skeptical about any kind of multilateralism. And signals that he is sending recently through Vice President Vance, through Rubio, are that, well, these allies, Western allies, are not equal anymore. That in reality, there is the US and there are junior partners who have to behave as junior partners. So essentially, recent discussions, recent Vance's trip to Europe was much more about Europe than about Ukraine. Ukraine turned out to be secondary. The signal to Europeans was either you do what we want you to do or you are on your own. And respectively, the way negotiations are conducted, they are not only about Ukraine, they are also a signal of a new geopolitical reality and reality of American foreign policy. So it's a long-term strategic line. It's not a tactical move that, well, takes place in regard to Ukraine, but it's a very clear indicator to Europeans that the rules of the game are changing, and they understood it very well. They tried to demonstrate their ability to, well, to make some kind of unified decisions, and it turned out to be even more embarrassing to them when the major European leaders met in Paris, and basically they could not achieve any agreement. And quite frankly, they don't have either military or economic capacity to do what they, at least initially, announced they were planning to do.
Dr. Demirtas, considering your experience in Ukraine, what's your take on the EU's position in the Ukraine conflict in light of recent talks between the US and Russia? Do you think the EU is at risk of becoming irrelevant in shaping the outcome of the war, or is there still space for Europe to act as a mediator?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Lavrina. It's an important question. Also, all the world public opinion, maybe diplomatic circles, also are wondering about what's happening in Europe. Because I think for these last 10 years, maybe 15 years, the European fragmentation, I think the separation between the opinion leaders and also between the parties and political, decision takers inside Europe, inside European Union, is so huge. And as Turkey also, we watched that some things really can be positive, but another day we see that something so negative also towards us, towards also the other issue of the world diplomacy. And now we see in Ukrainian case, also there's a fragmentation, a very decisive fragmentation, I think, between the members of the European Union, even between these Central European states, between, I think, Germany, in Italy, United Kingdom, even it is not anymore the European Union member, but still is an important partner of the European affairs for sure. But still we see all these actors have some different public opinions. Of course, democratic rule, democracy's number one rule is, of course, getting some votes, election votes. And these parties, maybe the leaders, also thinking about their own sakes, thinking about their own political maybe futures, But still, foreign policy is not this. Foreign policy needs some middle and long-term maybe thinking. And Mr. Zelensky maybe repeated these words very decisively 2 days ago, just in Munich Security Conference. Please remember this security conference. It's taking a very critical time in this last weekend in Munich, in München, and it's a very also important center of course, the European culture and also diplomacy. And we saw that these leaders, I mean, European leaders, some of them are even crying. These unfortunate scenes, we saw them from these televisions, but we really do not want to see that such leaders who really created these modern diplomatic ideals. Think about 17th, 18th century French, British, and all these diplomatic ideals are making this, I mean, tradition of diplomacy. In my also serving time from 2011 to 2015 in Odessa in Ukraine, I saw that some members of these European states can be so also effective, like Germans, like of course some Central or Eastern European countries, but still they could not also see some long-term effects of some other states, like first of all Russia. I said Munich Security Conference, for example, think about 2007. Yes, just 2007 Munich Security Conference. It's so famous, so crucial, because for the first time, Mr. Putin, President of Russian Federation, said about this near abroad and said about these sensitivities of Russian foreign policy in Munich Security Conference. And I think since that time, some leaders in Europe could not really take into account these sensitivities and take not into account this long-term perspective in diplomacy, unfortunately.
Mr. Eri, now we have also this important meeting between President Erdogan and President Zelensky. What does this meeting tell us about the shifting alliances in the Ukraine conflict? Is Turkey stepping into a larger role as a mediator, potentially filling the vacuum left by Europe?
Well, Turkey already had a very large role. I mean, when we look at the major diplomatic breakthroughs over the past 3 years, whether it's the April 2022 Istanbul agreement that was a mutually agreed upon peace deal that until the UK Prime Minister, at least according to leaks and sources, that Boris Johnson went to Kiev, sabotaged that deal. That was a major breakthrough. You have the meeting between Dmytro Kuleba, then Foreign Minister of Ukraine, and Sergei Lavrov at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. You have prisoner swaps. You have the grain corridor deal. This was all done under the auspices of the Turks. So they've already showed that they have been the major address for any type of major diplomatic breakthrough. I still think Turkey has a role to play going forward. But at this very moment right now, when it's very, very high stakes for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to come to Turkey rather than go to other European states, or rather go to other partners or other allies, shows how important a position Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has in this equation that will hopefully end with peace. And that's also a testament to the balanced relationship that Turkey has had with Russia over the past 3 years, where it has supported Ukraine, but it has also had a very healthy relationship with the Russians. And there's very, very few countries that can say that, but that goes to show the maturity of Turkey's approach to the conflict in Ukraine. And Turkey has a lot of experience with this. It has a lot of experience from what's happened in Syria over the Arab Spring, what's happened in Libya, what's happened in Iraq. So its diplomatic corps has a lot of experience on how to manage these types of situations with multidimensional approaches. And it's that multidimensional approach that Turkey has that's positioned itself very well to be a winner with peace, but that is also the single dimension approach by the Europeans that has left them irrelevant and on the sidelines watching.
Professor Koropkov, both United States State Secretary Marco Rubio and U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz have pushed back on suggestions that European officials will be left out of negotiations, noting that the EU will still be involved because of its sanctions on Russia. Do you think this is enough to keep the EU relevant in these talks, or does Europe need to do more to maintain its influence?
No, Europe will have a kind of cosmetic role in all that, but in reality, Trump is not inclined to really share power or resources with anybody. and he makes it very clear that for him it's an issue besides peace as such. It's an issue of control over resources. I think he started with rare metals, but he would demand control over Ukrainian infrastructure, including ports, first of all, Odessa, Nikolaev, and then these demands would go further. He would actively work now to undermine major European governments. He already, Vance has openly supported right-wing parties, and again, of the major leaders, only Meloni is ideologically close to Trump. So this policy of securing, American interests, including business interests, will continue, and Europeans would be allowed to, say, attend the signing ceremonies, but Trump is first of all oriented towards dealing with the major part. This concerns Ukraine as well, and here an additional complicating factor is Zelensky's position. From Trump's point of view, Zelensky has stabbed him in the back at least twice. First, in the Burisma case, and second, last year when Zelensky openly took sides during the US elections. So this also means that the fate of Zelensky and the fate of Ukraine have to be divided, separated, because it's clear that Zelensky is a totally unacceptable figure for Trump. He makes it very clear the way he treats Zelensky. And I think, ironically, for both US and Russia, elections in Ukraine and the replacement of the leadership in Ukraine would be among the major requirements for the achievement of any kind of resolution in that country.
Very interesting. Dr. Demirtas, following an emergency meeting in Paris, European leaders remain divided on how to respond to US President Donald Trump's dramatic policy shift on Ukraine, with France and Britain pushing for security guarantees and Germany bristling at any suggestions troops could be deployed. If the EU is to reclaim its role as a mediator, do you think it needs to form new alliances?
Yes, as I said this in the first response in your question, Mr. Zelensky also said this, as I said 2 days ago, as with the term of maybe European combined army or combined military force. It's a long issue. Since the creation of the European Union, we all know that common security policy and common military idea is always on the agenda of these European powers. But also with the effect of maybe United States domination, hegemony, or what you call it, in the 1990s and also in the first years of 2000 in the second millennia, we can say that European Union leaders cannot take this initiative so easily. But I think another reason is also some, Trojan horse, they call it maybe. There's British. I mean, this Britain's transatlantic important alliance with United States also maybe makes some hesitations or negative atmosphere in the European Union. But after the Brexit, also we can say that not only the British presence, but I think the ideological maybe divisions between the members or the leaders. I mean, I cannot call this maybe rightist or leftist or central liberal leaders, but still, independent of this political ideologies, they maybe think about that European Union cannot be so huge, I mean, as a military force. Maybe this is also the past nightmare of Second World War, as we all remember that very in the near history, we saw how devastating can be this military power in one hand of one state. I mean, of course, German leaders or Miss German leaders. I mean, think about Miss Angela Merkel. She was a very powerful leader at that time. Even in her time, we cannot see any attempt or initiative to take this military ideal into the reality. Now we see, unfortunately, much more ineffective leaders inside the European Union, except maybe Mr. Macron, because Mr. Macron is still pushing himself to be so, one voice. I mean, with the European ideal, also he uses this Paris culture atmosphere or conference atmosphere. He uses, I think, in an effective way. Now he again did. As you said, in the last couple of days after the Munich conference, maybe he also take maybe this balance between German and French ideals and between French and German diplomatic styles. He made maybe an initiative, a new initiative, but we cannot say, I think, this can be a real solution to this divergence between these actors. We need a real maybe mediator, like, I think, United Secretary General. Think about Mr. Guterres' important role at these times. He just takes some initiatives as United Nations representative. I think European Union needs some also influential figures. We know that there are some figures as like Mr. von der Leyen and other bureaucrats, but still we need some other I think commission leaders, other maybe some figures who can be beneficial also to take these initiatives inside this public opinion of Germany, of France, of Spain, Italy, because all these countries have some deep histories and deep diplomacies, and they make maybe some decisions easily when they think about this divergence can real effect on their now near future because of Russian, because of American and other actors, real different ideas, which are so, I think, opposite side of this European Union agenda.
Dear experts, thank you very much for joining our discussion today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching Headlines. Do stay with A News and see you soon.